I moved into apartment 5B, then my reflection started watching me Reddit horror story. It started with the scratching. Not loud enough to be alarming, not soft enough to ignore. Just persistent, insistent, somewhere between a whisper and a scrape. At first, I thought it was the radiator in the bedroom wall. The building was old, the kind that groaned with memory, that exhaled dust and creaked in protest when the wind changed direction. I moved into apartment 5B the first week of May alone, after what I now call the collapse. A personal catastrophe wrapped in the polite paperwork of divorce and relocation. The real estate agent had assured me it was a peaceful building, mostly elderly residents, a few students, no drama. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be left alone. That's exactly what I didn't get. On the first night, I heard footsteps above me. That was normal, comforting even. A reminder of life continuing just out of reach. But around 3 a.m., I woke up cold, though the heating was on and the air felt off, still. Waited. Then the scratching started. Faint, irregular, like something clawing or dragging just behind the wall next to my bed. I sat up, trying to trace it. The sound stopped. I lay back down. It began again. Not rhythmic. Not animal. I checked behind the nightstand the next morning, expecting a mouse hole, maybe a pipe. Nothing, just pale yellow wallpaper peeling at the corner like old skin. The second night, the scratching came earlier and closer. This time, it was from the wall behind the closet. I pushed the hangers aside, pressing my ear to the cold surface. The sound paused, then came once more, sharp and deliberate, like a finger tapping from the other side. I jerked back, told myself it was plumbing, or settling beams, told myself a lot of things. Days passed. I got used to the noises like one gets used to a scar. Present slightly sensitive, but no longer shocking. I worked from home, hunched over spreadsheets and video calls, wearing the same hoodie every day like armor. I nodded to neighbors in the hall. Mrs. Clean from 5C gave me cookies once. Said I looked too pale to be alone all day. I thanked her, smiled, and retreated behind my door. I didn't want to be seen. Not really. Then one evening, as I was brushing my teeth, I looked into the mirror and saw movement behind me. Nothing dramatic, just a flicker of shadow by the open closet. I turned, heart jerking once in my chest. Nothing there. The scratching didn't happen that night. Instead, there was silence. A silence that pressed against the window panes like fog. I lay in bed, waiting, not realizing how used I'd become to the noise until it vanished. Around 3 a.m., I got up, paced the apartment barefoot, listening. Still nothing. But when I passed the hall mirror, I stopped. There, at the edge of the glass, barely visible, was the faint impression of a handprint. Too high to be mine. Too wide. I wiped the mirror. It didn't budge. I didn't sleep. The next day I asked the super, Tony, if anyone had been in my apartment. He looked confused. Well, would they? You've got the only key. I asked about the wall behind the closet. He shook his head. Solid. Brick and drywall. Old plumbing maybe, but there's no crawl space or anything. You're not the first to ask, though. I blinked. Who else? He scratched his cheek. Letty before you. Moved out last winter. Said she kept hearing someone breathing through the walls. He laughed like it was a joke. It didn't feel like a joke. That night, I sat by the closet with my phone recording. For hours, nothing. Then, just past 2:58 and the temperature dipped. I saw my breath. The scratching started slow. Calculated. A series of 4 quick scrapes, then a pause. Over and over. I played the recording back the next morning, expecting to hear it again, to prove I wasn't losing it. But the audio was silent. Completely blank from 2:50 until 3:15. The time of the noise. I tried other devices. Every time I recorded, it was as if the sound never existed. I stopped trying. Instead, I started marking the scratches on the wall. They were never visible, but I could tell where the sound came from. An instinctive thing. I used chalk. Circles for scrapes. Lines for taps. The pattern formed a curve, then a spiral, then what looked like an eye. A week later, the wall was covered in symbols I didn't remember drawing. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom and moved to the couch. But even there, I felt watched. I didn't see eyes. I didn't hear voices, but I felt presence. One night, I dreamt I was in the closet, unable to move, as if the clothes had turned to limbs that wrapped around my body. I couldn't breathe. I woke up gasping, tangled in the throw blanket, the apartment dark despite the morning sun. I checked the time. 3:17 p.m. My phone had shut off, battery full. It wouldn't turn back on for 3 days. I stopped working. I told my boss I had the flu. I unplugged my TV. I taped over the mirrors. I stopped answering the door. And still, each night the scratching grew louder, like whatever was behind the wall was growing braver. Or hungrier. Then came the knock. Not from the door, but from the closet itself. A single, firm knock at 3:12 a.m., followed by a whisper I felt more than heard, like breath across the back of my neck. Let me in. I didn't sleep, I didn't move. When the sun rose, I opened the closet. Nothing inside, except one of the hangers was swinging, slowly, back and forth, as if it had just been touched. The next day I left. I packed a single duffel, grabbed my coat, and walked out without locking the door. I checked into a motel across town and didn't tell anyone where I went. I left the phone behind. I didn't want it following me. I didn't sleep the first night, or the second. But nothing happened. No sounds, no scratches, no knocks. Until the third night. At 3:12 a.m. the motel alarm clock turned on by itself, static. Then, through the noise, came a voice, soft, familiar. Why did you leave me? I threw the clock across the room. It shattered. Silence returned. But I knew. It wasn't the apartment. It wasn't the closet. It wasn't even the wall. It was me. I checked out before the sun rose. Left the motel room as it was. Sheets twisted, broken clock in the corner, mirror turned to face the wall. I didn't wait for breakfast. Didn't wait for anything. My hands were trembling as I signed the checkout slip, but I didn't care how I looked. The clerk barely glanced at me. People don't look too closely at those who are obviously unraveling. That's a lesson I've learned more than once. I took a train, the first one that left the station. Didn't care where it went. I just needed motion, distance, something linear to cut through the spiraling fear that had rooted itself inside me. I ended up in a town whose name I couldn't pronounce, 4 hours from the city, surrounded by fog and the scent of wet leaves. It was the kind of place that still used payphones, where the sidewalks cracked like old bones and every storefront looked closed even when it wasn't. I rented a room above a diner. Cash only. The old man who gave me the key barely asked questions. I think he assumed I was running from something. He wasn't wrong. That first night I triple locked the door, moved the bed away from the wall, and sat with my back against the bathroom tiles. Cold and safe and solid. No scratching, no whispers. The room was small and square, with no closet, no mirrors. Just a bed, a desk, and one grimy window. I dared to hope. Maybe it needed the apartment. Maybe it needed the closet. Maybe I had left it behind. But that was the thing. I didn't understand the rules yet. On the second night, I heard a knock. Not from the wall, from the door. A soft, polite knock. Like someone who didn't want to wake you but needed you to open. I stayed silent. After a while, I crept forward and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the hallway, empty and gray. I turned back toward the room and froze. On the desk was a sheet of paper I hadn't seen before. Yellowed, brittle, the kind of paper that belonged in a file cabinet no one had opened in decades. On it was a drawing. A spiral, just like the one I'd traced on the wall back in 50B. I burned it in the sink, watched the paper curl and blacken and vanish in flakes. But that night, the spiral was back. Scratched into the fog window glass from the outside. I didn't sleep. I sat with a chair propped under the doorknob and a knife I didn't know I'd packed clutched tight in my hand. I didn't blink for hours. When the sun rose, the spiral was gone. I went back downstairs and asked the old man if he'd seen anyone come up to the second floor. He looked at me, expression unreadable, and said, "No one comes up there but ghosts." Then he laughed, but not like it was funny. More like it was inevitable. I didn't ask him anything after that. I stayed in that room for another week. The scratches started again on the third night. First soft, then more deliberate. But always without pattern, always just past 3 a.m. It was like something testing the boundaries of a new container. Then came the breathing, long, labored, damp, sounding. It wasn't in the walls. It was in the air. Like the room was inhaling me. I started writing things down to stay sane. Dates, sounds, drawings. I found myself repeating phrases in the margins without realizing it. Don't answer. Don't reflect. Don't look back. I don't remember writing those. My handwriting changed when I did. Then came the photos. I found one in my coat pocket. Me asleep on the motel bed. My eyes closed. My mouth slightly open. The blanket pulled halfway down my body. The angle of the shot was from the ceiling. There was no camera up there. No ladder. Nothing that made sense. Just the photo. Grainy. Printed on old paper. I tore it up. Burned it. But a new one appeared the next day. This time I was standing. In front of the mirror in the bathroom I'd covered with a towel. My face wasn't mine. It had no features. Just smooth, pale skin where my eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. I ran. No train this time. I stole a car. An old one. Keys still in the ignition outside the diner. I left money on the dashboard. I drove for hours. Mountains, trees, towns that flickered by like ghosts. I ended up in a place I remembered from my childhood. A campground long abandoned, where my family used to go before everything fell apart. Before my mother vanished, before my father stopped speaking, before I learned how silence can be louder than screams. There were cabins there, half collapsed, overtaken by moss and time. I found one that still had a door and stayed there. No phone, no power. Just wind and memory and the sound of birds I didn't recognize. It was peaceful for 2 nights. On the 3rd night, I woke up to the sound of water dripping. The cabin had no plumbing. I followed the noise to the corner where the floor had caved in. The dripping was coming from below, from the crawl space. I pried up the floorboard and found a ladder leading into darkness. There was no reason to climb down, but I did. The air changed as I descended, got warmer, thicker, like I was breathing someone else's breath. The space below wasn't a crawl space, it was a room. Circular, carved into stone. In the center was a chair, and on the chair was a mirror, covered in a sheet. I didn't touch it, but I could feel it watching. Then I heard the voice again, the same whisper from the motel, the same hiss from the closet wall. But now it was everywhere. "Let me see you." I ran, up the ladder, out of the cabin. I didn't stop until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I slept under the stars, dirt in my hair, cold in my bones. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. They told me a hiker found me unconscious on the trail. No ID, no phone, dehydrated. I told them my name. They couldn't find any record of me. No apartment, no job, no recent photos. It was like I didn't exist. And then came the mirror, not in my room, but in the hallway. Just outside the door, hung too high for any patient to use, but tilted down, like it wanted to see me. I avoided it, always turned my face away, until one night I caught a glimpse, and the reflection wasn't mine. It was a face with no face. It smiled, and then the lights went out. The blackout only lasted 7 seconds. I counted each one like a prayer, like a heartbeat trying not to stop. 7 seconds of absolute void. No emergency lights, no beeping monitors from nearby rooms, no soft shuffle of nurses' shoes down sterile hallways. Just a silence so deep it rang. When the lights flickered back on, I was no longer alone. Not really. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Something had changed. The air wasn't just thick anymore. It felt occupied. I pressed the call button. Nothing. I tried the intercom. Silence. I sat upright in the hospital bed, wires still stuck to my chest like artificial veins, and stared at the door. It was cracked open just enough for a sliver of shadow to spill in from the hallway. I told myself I was imagining it, that this was all some trauma-induced hallucination, that my brain was desperate to make sense of the senseless. But then I heard it. 3 soft taps, from the mirror in the hall. I slid out of bed slowly, careful not to make a sound, careful not to disturb the balance of things, like a noise too loud might tip the scale in its favor. I crept to the door and pushed it open inch by inch. The corridor was deserted, not a soul in sight. But the mirror that hung across the hall, it was different now. The glass wasn't reflective, it was black, like a pool of ink suspended vertically. And in the center of it, just barely visible in the hospital's dim afterglow, was a ripple, a gentle pulse as if the mirror were breathing, "Way, I back to better now." This thing, whatever it was, didn't want to be understood, it wanted to be obeyed. Seen. Reflected. That's when I remembered the phrase I'd written in the motel margins without memory. Don't reflect. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a warning, but it was too late. That night, I slept with my back to the window. I woke up exactly at 3:12 a.m., my body rigid, pulse slow but pounding, mouth dry and stuck open in a silent scream. Because there, standing at the end of my bed, was me. Or something wearing me like a costume stitched from skin and memory. Its face was featureless, its posture exact. It tilted its head in a way I knew I'd done 100 times in front of the mirror. Then, without moving, it spoke. Or maybe it thought the words straight into my skull. "Now you see me." The lights flickered. My body moved without permission. I blinked, and it was gone. They discharged me the next morning. I didn't argue. I signed whatever they gave me with a hand that wasn't entirely mine anymore. The nurse smiled like she knew something I didn't. Or maybe like she had known, once, and forgotten just in time to stay sane. I walked out with no ID, no home, no reflection. From then on, I avoided mirrors like plague, shiny surfaces too. The glint of a spoon, the back of a phone screen, puddles, anything that might show me more than what was in front of me. I walked at night, slept during the day, changed cities every 3 days. I paid in cash, ate only from sealed packages, burned every photo of myself I found online. And still, it followed. Each time I closed my eyes, it built a little closer. Not in the world, but in my mind. I started seeing reflections in places that couldn't have any. The back of my eyelids would flash with motion. My dreams became looping corridors with windows I was terrified to look through. One night, I woke up in a public restroom with the words, STOPI8NG, scrawled on the stall wall in something that smelled like blood but looked like ink. My hands were clean. My clothes weren't. I checked myself into a shelter, gave them a fake name. I thought maybe if I became no one, it couldn't find me. But that night, a girl sleeping 2 bunks over screamed. When they turned on the lights, she was clawing at her own eyes, muttering about the smile behind the glass. I left before the medics arrived. I spent weeks on the streets, moving, always moving. But wherever I went, I saw spirals, on walls, on napkins, in leaves scattered by the wind. One night, I found a crumpled photograph in the trash. It was of a man I didn't recognize, sleeping in a bed that wasn't mine. But the angle of the shot, straight from above, was familiar. I turned it over. Written in sharp, deliberate strokes were 3 words: "You took mine." I didn't sleep that night. Eventually, I found my way to a burned-out church in a forgotten part of the city. The roof had caved in, and the altar was buried under rotten leaves. But there was one intact room in the back. Confessional. Small. Boxed in. Safe. I holed up there for what felt like a week, surviving on rainwater and stolen crackers. I started carving warnings into the wood with a rusted nail. Don't reflect. Don't answer. Don't turn around. I repeated them like mantras. My voice gone hoarse from repeating them out loud. But then, on the 7th night, I heard it again. Scratch. Pause. A whisper too closer. Trade me. I slammed the confessional shut and held it closed with my body. It knocked once, then nothing. But when I woke the next day, the nail was gone. And on the opposite wall, scrawled in clean, perfect handwriting, was the sentence, "You already did." I don't remember leaving. I don't remember how I got to the next town, or the one after that. I only remember waking up with someone else's wallet in my pocket, a driver's license with a face almost like mine, name close to mine, birth date off by 1 digit. Every time I looked at it, the photo changed. First a subtle shift in posture, then in expression. Eventually, the man on the card stopped blinking altogether. I dropped it into the river, but by then it didn't matter. Because I had begun to fade. Not physically, not yet, but people stopped remembering me. I'd ask a cashier a question, and they'd walk away halfway through my sentence, blinking like they'd forgotten why they were standing there. I spoke to a woman on a park bench once. We talked for 10 minutes. Shared a sandwich. Laughed. She asked my name, and I gave her a fake one. She smiled. But when I returned from the bathroom, she looked at me like a stranger, said the bench was taken, said she didn't remember talking to anyone. I checked a mirror in a gas station, just to confirm. My face was almost gone, only the outline remained, like the memory of a face blurred by time. That night I made a decision. If this thing was following me, becoming me, then maybe the only way out was to find where it started, to trace the spiral back to its center. I returned to the apartment, 5B. I didn't expect it to be vacant, but it was. The door was ajar. The hallway smelled like mold and old secrets. I stepped inside. It looked the same, dust covering every surface. Furniture right where I left it. The closet still open, still humming that strange, hollow silence. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and waited. The darkness came fast, and with it a sensation I can't fully explain. Like stepping into a memory I'd never lived. I saw flickers of other people, other lives. A girl painting her nails on the bed, a man recording the wall, an elderly woman writing letters to no one, all of them haunted, all of them gone. All of them. Me, the wall across from me shimmered, opened like a mouth. Inside, not a room, but a mirror. The same one. Infinite. Alive. And in its reflection, dozens of versions of me, each frozen in different poses. One crying, one laughing, one screaming, one dead, and one, the last, smiling. Then the mirror cracked. Not shattered. Split. And I understood. This wasn't about haunting. It was about replacing. And I had just let it in. When the mirror cracked, I didn't hear the sound. I felt it. Like a rib shifting wrong inside my chest. Like a piece of my memory folding inward. There was no shatter, no cinematic explosion of glass raining down. Just a line, hair, thin and perfect, running vertically from top to bottom, separating 2 sides of something that was never supposed to split. On the left, I saw myself, gaunt, fading, eyes wide with something between fear and inevitability. On the right, I saw it. The thing that had been following me, mimicking me, learning to be me more accurately than I ever could. And as that crack widened, I realized it wasn't just dividing us. It was deciding between us. Then came the pull, not physical. Not entirely. But I felt my center shift, as if something inside me had been waiting for this, leaning toward this outcome for longer than I could imagine. I stepped back instinctively, but there was nowhere to retreat. The closet behind me had disappeared. The apartment was gone. I stood in a liminal nowhere, surrounded by the infinite reflections of versions of myself, some recognizable, some twisted by regret, some empty. The mirrored version on the right smiled. Not cruelly, not kindly, just calmly, with the confidence of someone who knew it had already won. And then it did something simple, something terrifying. It blinked, and I felt myself forget how to. I tried to close my eyes, but the muscles didn't respond. Panic rose, hot and sour, but there was nothing to hold on to, no edge to grip. I was unraveling, not like a thread being pulled, but like a photograph exposed to fire, first curling, then blackening. Nothing. I fell, or I was dropped. I hit ground. Cold, wooden, real. I gasped and sat up fast, heart thundering like a warning drum. I was back in the apartment, or what looked like it, but everything was wrong. The colors were too flat, the air too quiet. The light didn't come from anywhere. It just was, static, stale, like a stage set waiting for actors that never arrived. And the walls, they pulsed. Not visibly, but I could feel it in my teeth like bass in an empty concert hall. I got up, tried the door. It opened too easily. Outside was the hallway, but it stretched wrong. Too long, no elevator, no stairwell. Just door after door, each identical to the next, each marked the number slightly off from what it should be. 5B, 5B. Dozens of them, repeating into forever. I picked one at random, opened it. Inside it, a room filled with water, still as glass, a couch floating in the center, and a man asleep on it. Or dead. His face was mine. I shut the door. Tried another. This one was filled with fog. Shapes moved inside. Vague and flickering. I called out. One turned to me. It had no face, but I knew the posture. Knew the way its hand twitched when startled. It stepped toward me fast. I slammed that door too. I walked, feet aching on the endless hallway floor, turning knobs and seeing versions of a life I never lived. Or maybe had, in a different branch of memory. Rooms where I never moved out. Rooms where I never left her. Rooms where I had children. Rooms where I was buried under broken glass. Then I found a door with no number. I opened it. Inside was a long dining table, candlelit, every chair filled, and at the head a mirror, no reflection, just blackness. The others around the table turned to me slowly. All of them, me. But age, injured, blind, limbless, weeping, laughing, grotesque. One had no skin, one had eyes stitched open. One kept whispering, "Trade is fair, trade is fair, trade is fair." I backed out. But the hallway behind me was gone. Now it was the spiral. No longer a drawing, no longer a symbol. A corridor turning endlessly inward, down and around, built of doors and mirrors and pieces of thought. I ran. I don't know how long. Hours, days. There was no clock, just echoes and the feeling that something was always 2 steps behind. At the center of the spiral, I found her. My mother. Or a version of her. Sitting on a bed made of books, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a priest. She looked up and smiled, tears down her cheeks. "You're early," she said. I didn't speak, couldn't. My throat was a tunnel of sand. "You weren't supposed to see this until the end," she continued, "till it finished with me." She lifted her shirt. There was a mirror embedded in her chest. Cracked, bleeding light instead of blood, and in its surface I saw myself. Only it wasn't me. It was what I would become if I stayed here. If I gave in. "Oh, the spiral takes," she whispered. "It doesn't steal. It exchanges. You give it your shape, it gives you oblivion." I fell to my knees. "What is this place?" I finally choked out. Her face crumpled like paper, old and defeated. "This is where all forgotten selves go. All discarded maybes. You fed it every time you doubted. Every time you looked in the mirror and hated what looked back. It grew on your reflection. And now it's hungry for your ending." As she reached into the mirror in her chest and pulled something out, a small object, smooth, cold. "My first house key. Take it," she said, "or you'll forget you ever had a door." I took it, everything shattered. I woke up gasping on concrete, beneath a highway underpass, with a bruise on my head and blood on my palms. It was raining, the kind of rain that scrubs everything quiet. I looked around. The world was real again. Tangible, imperfect. Load. I stood slowly. The key was still in my hand. It didn't open any door I could find, but I kept it anyway. For weeks, nothing happened. No whispers, no scratches, no faces in the mirror. I moved into a shared apartment with other people, stayed in the light, kept conversation going even when it hurt. I laughed, I cooked, I slept in a bed with no closet next to it. It felt like a beginning. Until one night, I came home late. The hallway was quiet. My roommate was out. The bathroom mirror had fog from a shower I didn't take. And written in the condensation, as clearly as if someone had traced it with a finger, were 3 words. "I took yours." I turned. Nothing. But the mirror didn't fog again. And my reflection. It didn't blink. I tried not to scream. Not because I wasn't terrified, but because I didn't want to confirm anything. To myself, to it, to whatever had etched those words into the mirror's breath. Screaming meant surrender, meant acknowledgement. And I had learned the rule is don't reflect, don't answer, don't feed it your fear. I backed out of the bathroom slowly, eyes fixed on the glass, watching as my reflection stood perfectly still, unblinking, calm. Too calm. Its shoulders relaxed, mouth slightly parted, like it was enjoying the performance. I shut the door, locked it, moved to the living room, sat on the couch with my arms tight across my chest like that might hold me in place. But the stillness in the air wasn't just in the mirror anymore. It had leaked out. I could feel it settling over everything, a hush that didn't belong. No hum from the fridge, no creak from the upstairs neighbors. It was as though the world had been paused, except for me. I turned on the TV. Nothing. Black screen. I tried the light switch. No response. My phone was dead despite being on the charger all day. I was alone. Not in the normal way, in the way that feels engineered. Then came the knock. Not at the door, from the mirror. 3 taps. Gentle. Rhythmic, as if my reflection had decided it. We spoke face to face. I stood. My legs were numb, the blood unsure whether to flee or fight. I made my way back to the bathroom, each step heavier than the last, like I was walking through syrup. I opened the door. The mirror was clear now. No fog. No fog. No writing. Just me. Or mostly me. The reflection blinked this time, but not in sync. It waited, then blinked again, deliberately, and then it smiled. The mouth moved. Let me in. I shook my head. No. It tilted its head, my head, and tapped the glass from the other side again. But this time there was a crack, a visible line spreading from the point of contact like a vein. It pulsed, and when I looked down, I realized I was bleeding. A slow trickle from my nose, then my eyes. The crack in the mirror matched the one inside me. I ran. Out of the apartment, into the hallway, down the stairs, barefoot, blood on my shirt. I didn't look back. You don't look back. That's the rule. I collapsed on the street. Someone called an ambulance. I don't remember the ride. I remember lights and noise and voices asking me if I knew where I was. I didn't care. They admitted me for observation. Thought it might be a seizure. Or psychosis. I let them draw blood, poke my skin, scan my brain. I kept quiet when they asked about hallucinations. I wasn't going to describe a thing that wore my face like a mask. Not anymore. But that didn't stop it. At night, in the hospital bed, I turned my head toward the window. And it was there. Not outside, not in the reflection, in the glass. Like the world had become one great mirror, and I was just another image waiting to be replaced. One nurse noticed something. She came in to check my IV and paused. Her hand trembled slightly, just for a moment. Before she asked, "Did someone visit you last night?" I shook my head. Her brow furrowed. "Strange. The night shift said someone signed in with your name." She showed me the log. It was my handwriting. I hadn't written it. I begged them to remove all mirrors from the room. They didn't take me seriously. Told me they'd send someone from psych. They didn't. The next day, the mirror above the sink was shattered. No one claimed responsibility. No cameras caught it. Just broken glass, and in the corner of one jagged shard, I saw my reflection smile and wave. That night, I barricaded the door, hid in the closet of the hospital room, curled under the laundry. I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I was afraid of seeing. Sometime around 3:12 a.m., I heard footsteps, soft, crossing the room. Then a whisper, clear and coaxing, "You're tired, let me rest." I shut my eyes. The next morning, I was found asleep in bed. No one knew how I'd gotten there. The nurse said I looked peaceful, too peaceful, like I hadn't just slept, but had been put to sleep, sedated by something unseen. I was discharged again. They said I needed rest. Familiar places. I had no one to call, no job, no address, but I had the key. The one from the spiral, from the chest mirror. I started following it, not in a literal sense. It didn't fit any known lock, but I began dreaming of places, seeing symbols, spirals, spracks, windows, in graffiti, in books, in architecture. It was leading me somewhere. I became obsessed. A map built itself in my mind, abandoned buildings, closed factories, hospitals with sealed wings, all marked by the same invisible ink. I followed it, through basements, steam tunnels, sewer grates. Places between places, forgotten, rejected. Like the spiral itself, I began to understand. This thing didn't live in mirrors. Mirrors were just its mouth. Its true home was in the forgotten corridors of consciousness, in the cracks between what you believe and what you deny. It fed on identity, on dissonance, on people who didn't recognize themselves. I was its feast. Then I found him, in an old rail station, boarded up since the 70s, a man, sitting cross-legged on the floor. surrounded by broken glass, none of it reflecting anything. He looked up at me and smiled. Without a face, I recoiled. He raised a hand slowly, pointed to his chest. There, embedded like a jewel, was a tiny mirror, cracked, breathing. Familiar. He spoke, though his mouth never moved. His voice was inside my skull, gentle and jagged all at once. "You're the last." I shook my head. "I'm just a copy." He finished. "But you're learning." I backed away. "What is this? What do you want?" He cocked his head. "We want to remember. You forgot us." I didn't understand. "Not then I would." He stood, moved toward me. The closer he got, the more I could feel something rising inside me, recognition. Like a memory buried in salt, preserved but warped. He reached out, touched my forehead with a single finger. And then, I saw everything. Hundreds of me, thousands. Lives I had lived and lost and abandoned. Faces I wore, shed, destroyed. Versions of myself I denied. They were all here. All spiraling inward, toward this one convergence point. The me had become was just a layer. A skin over older skins, thinner and thinner until nothing remained but echo. And in the center of the spiral was a room. One chair. One mirror. Empty. Waiting. He pulled away. The vision faded, but the understanding didn't. I was the replacement. Not the first. Not the original. Just the dead next. And I was almost out of time. I left the station without walking. It felt like I was pushed. Ejected by something that had finally grown bored of puppeteering me through corridors made of memory and mirror shards. The world outside hadn't changed, not in the way people notice. The sun still made its obligatory arc across the sky. People still argued about politics and ate too fast and watched screens like they meant something. But I had changed. Or rather, something inside me had calcified. Solidified into a single, terrifying certainty. I was the final layer, the last skin. And the thing I'd been running from wasn't chasing me anymore. It was wearing me. Every time I blinked, I felt it. Not just behind my eyes, but with my eyes, like we were blinking in shifts, trading glances through a single window of flesh. People started looking at me differently, with a delay, like their brains needed a second longer to map my features. A barista once paused mid-pour and asked if we'd met before. I said no. She stared for a moment, her eyes glossing with the distant sheen of deja vu, then looked away like she'd almost seen something she wasn't supposed to. I didn't go back there again. I stopped speaking to strangers. Stopped calling what few friends I had left, stopped speaking to myself out loud. Because it started answering back, not in sound, but in motion. In reflections I didn't make, in footsteps that synchronized too well, in the rhythm of my breath suddenly becoming a question. One night, I went to a small lake outside the city. I'd read somewhere that still water could offer truth to those willing to look deep enough. But when I stood at the edge, I saw only absence. Not a dark silhouette, not an uncanny mimicry. Nothing. The water reflected the stars, the trees, the moon. But not me. That's when I knew it had taken over. But not entirely. It still needed permission. It needed me to step out fully. To finish the ritual, to abandon the last thread of identity tying me to the original spark. That's what the spiral wanted. It wasn't a possession. It was a chain traded. A system of exchange. You look into the void, and eventually, it looks better than what you were trying to escape. I walked back from the lake numb, shoes soaked, heart hollow. I stopped sleeping. Not out of fear, but because dreams were no longer mine. When I closed my eyes, I dreamt of things I didn't know, memories that weren't mine, feelings that didn't match. Sometimes I was a child watching a fire consume my house. Sometimes I was a woman running barefoot across a highway, mouth stitched shut. Sometimes I was in space. Sometimes I was buried alive. Always the reflection came in at the end, watching, waiting, and then the final door appeared. Not metaphorically. I mean a literal, physical door in the wall of my apartment, where no door had ever been. No hinges. No trim. Just a rectangle of old, black wood warped and humming slightly, like it had been breathing in a different rhythm from the rest of the building. On it was carved a single word, return. I don't know how long I stared at it, hours maybe. The clock hands had stopped moving. My phone battery read 1200 at 100% for an entire night. Outside, the city fell silent. Not quiet, silent, as if everything had paused to see if I would open it. And I did. The door led to a stairwell, endless, spiraling down. No walls, just steps. And on each landing, some were broken, some intact. In some I saw myself. In others, I saw things using my face like a carnival mask. One mirror showed me eating alone in a cafe that had burned down years ago. Another showed me hugging a child I'd never met. Another showed me staring at the mirror itself, inside the mirror, holding the same expression I wore right now. On the 33rd landing, the mirrors stopped showing me. They started showing him. The one I had seen at the train station. The one with no face. But now it had mine. And it was smiling wider. I kept going. The air grew colder. Wet. Electric, like the air before a storm, before an accident. The steps ended at a chamber carved in stone. At its center, no surprise, was a chair. And a mirror. But this time I understood. This was the final transaction. Sit down. Look, decide. If I walked away now, I'd remain, but not whole. I'd be haunted, incomplete. The thing would keep watching, waiting, eroding the barrier between our minds until one day it blinked and I didn't blink back. If I sat, maybe it would stop. Or maybe I'd become like him. Hollow. Just another version wandering the halls between selves. But maybe, just maybe. There was a third option. I stepped toward the chair. As I sat, the mirror lit up. Not with reflection, but with light. Like a screen waking after years of sleep. I saw every version of me flash by. Hundreds. All their choices, all their regrets. One cheated on his wife. One never said goodbye to his father. One stole. One saved. One killed. One was killed. I saw the original. Or what I think was the original. A boy maybe 12 staring into a broken shard after his mother vanished without warning. Seeing himself distorted. Asking the wrong questions. Believing the wrong answers. That's when it started. That's when the spiral first heard him. The mirror began speaking. Not with words, but with meaning. It offered peace. Escape. A way out of all versions. A quiet blankness. The thing didn't want to torment me. It wanted me to let go. To surrender identity, to dissolve into the spiral and become one with every face I had ever worn. And for a second, I almost said yes. But then I thought of the girl on the bench who forgot me. The nurse who hesitated, the barista's pause, all tiny rebellions in reality, proof that even in this storm of selves, the real me had left fingerprints. Not many. But enough. I stood up. The mirror screamed. Not sound. A feeling. A wave of rage and need and hunger so primal it nearly knocked me to my knees. The reflection tried to pull me in. Literally, the glass bent outward, forming hands, fingers, a face. It reached. I stepped back, took out the key, and pressed it against the mirror. The glass resisted, then cracked, a single fracture, then more. The light inside turned red, then black, then nothing. The mirror fell inward. The chamber collapsed. I don't remember waking up, but I remember light, real light, the kind that filters through dusty curtains on a Sunday morning. I was lying in a bed, a real one. My bed, the old up mattress I'd hated for years. The posters on the wall were mine. The bookshelf. The cracked lamp. The smell of cheap soap and worn-out laundry detergent. It was my childhood bedroom, untouched. Like time had folded back in on itself and asked if I wanted a do-over. I walked to the mirror above the dresser. My reflection blinked. I blinked back. It smiled. I didn't. I touched the glass. Cold. Real. It wasn't gone. I knew that. The spiral never ends. It just loops. But something had changed. It didn't own me anymore. I had seen the center, faced the exchange, and refused. And now I look for others. People who blink too slowly, who pause when they see themselves, who step over puddles not because they're deep, but because they're afraid to see what might be looking back. Sometimes I stop them, warn them. Sometimes I'm too late, but always I watch, because I know what it's like to be watched. And now so do you. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.